At Department 56, we begin each house with a story. Our stories cover everything from a glimpse into Santa's world to how Dickens might have spent a day in Victorian London and beyond. These stories create an affinity between Department 56 and our collectors. From start to finish, a typical Department 56 house can take an average of 6 months from initial ideation to finished piece. Now you can take a peek behind the scenes of Department 56 for the backstory that leads to the creation of each of our houses. Then we hand off our stories to our collectors, who then begin their stories. Our artists are constantly keeping an eye out for anything that may spark an idea that could lead to a thumbnail sketch or a conversation with a colleague. This happens throughout the year. Twice a year, we sit down to organize and formalize these ideas to begin the process of our yearly introductions. We discuss our villages to continue storylines or to introduce new storylines. Based on our ideation, a list is created categorizing the houses by village. We then start the process of working with our artists to bring these ideas to life. We have artists of numerous backgrounds and talents on staff to help us with this process. Many have worked with Department 56 for well over 20 years. Each artist is assigned projects which play to their strengths. Working from the list and following through on notes from the ideation process, a clean sheet of paper is filled with thumbnails and notes until the artist chooses a direction. And then the art staff meets on a weekly basis to review works in progress. With the green light from the art review, the artist begins final design work on the house, starting with final sketching and then moving to final orthographic views. With final art completed, a 3D paper model is built to finalize sizing and to aid in the sculpting process.
Hi, I'm Tom Bates. I'm a designer for Department 56, and I've been here for close to 25 years. So I have to say about thinking about my job, what I really enjoy about it is just the fact that I have just absolutely loved the people that I work with. Number one, the collectors, getting to meet them and their passion for our work. In reality, that's everything. I do love being an artist, and I am so happy that I found a job that I could come in every day and work on the creative side. But big picture is, it really is that people actually like the work and they collect it and because they really appreciate it. And the more I think about it, my favorite thing is when I get to go out and I see these little kids and they're so excited looking at that. And then I think of, the people that own it, and maybe they're grandparents now, and they want those kids to get excited about it. I want them to let them put up their villages and let those kids really, really appreciate them because they truly love looking in and playing with the villages.
Final art is handed over to our sculptor. They review the art and the paper model to plan the sculpting process. Each house is sculpted in pieces similar to the 3D paper model and are sculpted with clay, plaster, or wax. On this project, Kiri is working with plaster. Each house is created slightly larger than its final size to allow for shrinkage in the manufacturing process. Each piece of the house is sculpted using hand tools. Upon completion and approval, the sculpt is sent out for molding.
My name's Kiri Namtvedt, and I'm a senior sculptor here. And I've been working at Department 56 for 22 years. It is really neat to take a two-dimensional drawing and turn it into a three-dimensional object, because just seeing something become this real-world shape and adding all the details and the problem solving too is really fun, because one thing about making this thing that's going to be fired in a kiln is that I have to sculpt the side. Like if the side is a big flat area, I actually have to sculpt it bulging outward slightly, because in the kiln it shrinks and pulls in. So it's just a good challenge.
Creating our molds introduces a third art form after design and sculpting. This step is crucial, as it requires a great deal of skill to create molds that will allow each house to be produced in quantity, yet still maintain incredible detail and reflect our artistic intent. Each part of the sculpture is molded. The complexity of the piece will determine the number of molds needed. A simple piece will require 2 molds. This piece will require 5. A front, a back, both sides, and bottom. A parting line is established with clay, and then walls are created with glass panes. This will form the box where the plaster is poured. The sculpted mix has been treated with a mold release. Then a plaster mix is poured into the mold box. The table is slightly shaken, and the mix stirred by hand to remove air bubbles. Once the plaster is dry, the mold box is removed and the mold is separated from the sculpt. The mold now has a negative imprint of the sculpt. This process is repeated until all 5 sides of this sculpt are molded and then separated from the sculpt. The 5 mold pieces are then assembled, creating a cavity, which leads us to the next step. After the production molds are created, the sculpted pieces are removed and set aside. The empty molds are reassembled and a material called slip is poured into each mold from a central reservoir. Slip is the liquid mix that can be modified to produce porcelain or ceramic pieces after firing. Once the mold is filled, it is set aside for 20 minutes. The porous plaster mold absorbs the liquid from the slip and dries the slip from the outside in, leaving a dried shell to form inside and against the mold. The excess slip is then poured out of the mold, leaving a dried shell inside, which is then removed. Slip casting allows us to create our hollow houses. Once all parts for a house are removed from the molds, they are assembled. The first step is trimming out windows and doors and other small parts. The second step is attaching each part using the slip as a bonding agent. Assembled houses are then set aside to continue drying for 1 or more days. The goal is to allow the water to evaporate to prevent problems while the house is in the kiln. As the parts dry and the water evaporates, the houses are slowly shrinking. And once they are completely dry, they are placed in a kiln for firing. There is a wide variety of products on the cart. Temperatures can vary inside the kiln, and the product is strategically placed for the best results. Once the door is closed, firing begins. Temperatures will reach nearly 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, and the firing will last 12 hours for porcelain. Ceramic has a shorter firing time under lower temperatures. Once the firing is completed, the houses are removed from the kiln. They went into the kiln as fragile greenware, but come out as a hardened whiteware, similar to porcelain or ceramic tableware. Here we see each piece being inspected before the painting process begins. Like every step before, all work is done by hand. Before entering production, we create 2 samples from the molds. These samples are painted by the factory staff and sent to Department 56 for approval and reviewed for color, because what works in 2D does not always work in 3D. Our artists review the sample and repaint as necessary. The artist also works on final decal art that will be sent back to the factory with the approved painted sample. Each of our production molds can produce approximately 25 to 30 pieces, depending on the surface detail. With slip casting, the plaster mold absorbs water out of the slip, and this absorption process takes its toll on the molds by slowly distorting the fine detail on the mold surface. As a result, this limits how many pieces a production mold can produce. Once the detail starts to diminish, the molds must be discarded. To give us the ability to create the quantity of production molds that are needed to produce our houses in a timely manner, we create a new set of molds called case molds. This process involves creating a plaster mold of each production mold piece. These case molds are then sealed to be watertight, allowing for the solid plaster production molds to be created as needed from these case molds. 5 to 6 houses can be created from our initial production molds and still keep a sharp set of molds for the creation of our case molds. Creating each house requires an impressive number of molds. There are so many molds required to get the job done that they would easily cover numerous tables. Once painting is completed, decals are applied. After decals, each house is placed in a low-temp kiln to set decals and paint. After painting and decal placement, non-porcelain parts are attached. These are parts that would not survive the kiln, such as die-cast signs, acrylic windows, and sisal trees. Once complete, the houses are placed in their protective packaging and inserted into their colorful sleeves. They are placed in shipping boxes and begin their journey to your home.
The story of Department 56 began over 45 years ago, and in that time, we have never forgotten that our collectors are what we are here for. We understand that the story behind each of our houses does not end when it is purchased, but continues on in homes across the country and beyond. There is tremendous support behind the scenes of the artists you have just met. This support guides the development of our goals, managing our partnership with our factories, sales, marketing, and shipping. We are confident that with this support, the traditions inspired by Department 56 will allow us to always be part of your holiday traditions.